In 1955, if you bought a brand new Ford, chances are it was a ticking time bomb when it came to the engine. However, a small change could completely fix it and transform the car forever. This is the story of the PCV valve, the $2 part that saved the American engine. But to really understand how much it transformed the car industry, you first have to understand what went wrong. You see, every piston engine has a dirty secret. The rings don't seal perfectly. They never have, even now. On every power stroke, a little combustion gas slips past the pistons and into the crankcase below. Engineers call it blow-by. Unburned gasoline, water vapor, acids, soot, all of it raining into the oil that's supposed to protect the engine. Run the engine hot and hard, and most of that contamination evaporates off. But that's not how Americans drove. 2 miles to the grocery store, 10 minutes to church. The engine never got hot enough to boil the water out of the oil. So that means the toxic waste remains in the system. Slowly but surely, it would become sludge. A gray mayonnaise under the oil cap. Black tar in the lifter valley. Basically a small heart attack, but for cars. So how did Detroit deal with blow-by in 1955? With a piece of engineering that sounds like a joke. The road draft tube. It was a pipe. That's it. A pipe from the crankcase down past the bottom of the engine, open to the road. As the car moves, air rushing past the opening creates suction and pulls the fumes out. Notice the catch? It only works when the car is moving. Below roughly 25 miles an hour, almost nothing. At idle, nothing. In stop-and-go traffic, exactly where sludge is born, the crankcase sits there, stewing in its own poison. And when the tube did work, where did the fumes go? Straight into the open air. Raw oil mist and unburned hydrocarbons dumped under the car. One out the back and one underneath. If you think this is not that bad, well, let me show you the Ford's Y-Block V8. Introduced in 1954, it was Ford's first modern overhead valve 8. Solid engine, one fatal weakness. The oil supply to the rocker shafts traveled through long, narrow passages. And those passages were exactly where sludge loved to settle. Feed a Y-Block a diet of short trips and dirty oil, and the top end slowly strangled. First a tick, then a clatter, then rocker shafts running dry. The problem became so common that the aftermarket sold external oil line kits. Copper tubing run up the outside of the engine, bypassing the clogged passages. Owners were literally plumbing around the sludge. And the Y-Block wasn't alone. Flathead Fords gummed up. Chevrolet's Stovebolt 6s gummed up. In the 1950s, a valve job by 50,000 miles was routine. And an engine that reached 100,000 miles without major surgery was a story you told the neighbors. Americans assumed that's just what engines did. It wasn't. It's what engines did without ventilation. But one day in Los Angeles, everything would change. July 26, 1943. A gray-brown haze rolls over the city, cutting visibility to 3 blocks. In the middle of a world war, residents genuinely feared a chemical attack. In a way, it was a chemical attack, but by their own cars. The man who figures it out is Arie Hagen-Smit, a Dutch-born biochemist at Caltech who had been happily studying pineapple flavor compounds. In 1952, he demonstrates that Los Angeles' smog isn't smoke at all. It is a chemical reaction. Hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides, cooked by sunlight into ozone. Photochemical smog. And the biggest source of those hydrocarbons is the automobile. Now we talk about the letters. Enter Kenneth Hahn, a Los Angeles County supervisor with a filing cabinet and a long memory. Starting in 1953, Hahn writes to the presidents of the major automakers with a simple question: what are you doing about the pollution from your cars? He just kept writing and slowly building up his evidence. To make things worse, back then, there was an easy solution already found. During World War II, the military had a problem. Vehicles needed to ford deep water, and you can't drive through a river with an open pipe hanging out of your crankcase. So, engineers sealed the crankcase and used the engine's own intake vacuum to pull the blowby out, routing it into the intake manifold, where the cylinders burned it like fuel. They called it positive crankcase ventilation, PVC for short. It worked beautifully. The crankcase stayed dry, the fumes got incinerated, and as a side effect, the oil stayed dramatically cleaner. Then the war ended, the trucks came home, and the idea went on a shelf, where it sat for 15 years. Because, well, to be honest, back then, people just did not care much about the environment. People weren't really informed on the issue, so no law was passed on it, and that meant that no one was willing to make a change. It's not like it was expensive either. A PCV valve is a check valve with a spring, pennies worth of steel that automakers just did not want to give up. So, in 1955, the automakers made a deal. Through their trade association, the industry signed a cross-licensing agreement. Any emissions technology developed by one company would be shared with all, royalty-free. On paper, cooperation. In practice, critics said a mutual non-aggression pact. If everyone shares the technology, no one gains an edge by deploying it first. And no one has to. Basically, people are stuck with very terrible engines and other things that destroy the environment. The federal government eventually agreed that something smelled. In 1969, the Justice Department sued the major automakers and their trade association, alleging a conspiracy to delay pollution control technology. The case ended in a consent decree with a promise to stop. In 1960, the state created the Motor Vehicle Pollution Control Board, with real power to mandate control devices. Detroit read the writing on the wall. Rather than wait for an order, the industry announced crankcase ventilation on 1961 models sold in California. 2 years later, for the 1963 model year, PCV valves went on essentially every new American car, coast to coast. The first emissions control device in automotive history cost at the parts counter $1 or $2. Time from invention to installation, nearly 2 decades. So, what exactly is this thing? Mechanically, it's almost insultingly simple. A pintle and a spring in a metal capsule. But it solves 3 problems at once. At idle, manifold vacuum is high, but blow-by is low. Full flow would lean the mixture and stumble the engine, so the vacuum pulls the pintle into a restricted position, and only a trickle passes. Under load, it reverses. Vacuum drops, blow-by rises, and the spring opens the valve to move the extra volume. And if the engine backfires, the pressure slams the valve shut because the crankcase is full of fuel vapor, and a flame in there means an explosion. One moving part, with no electronics, does all this. Meanwhile, fresh filtered air sweeps through the crankcase, picks up the moisture, the fuel, the acids, and the engine simply eats them. The results speak for themselves. Oil stayed clean thousands of miles longer. Through the 60s and the 70s, American engines quietly stopped dying young, and the 100,000-mile engine went from bragging rights to baseline expectation. And here's the beautiful irony. The PCV valve is the one emissions device enthusiasts always appreciate. It cut emissions, extended engine life, and even returned a little unburned fuel to the cylinders. It gave and gave. and asked only for a $2 replacement every couple of years. The PVC talk is one of my favorite topics because everyone swears that things were more reliable back in the day, when sometimes it's just the complete opposite. Of course, even now cars do have stupid issues, but they could be a lot worse. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.